Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Wokingham Borough Council's Executive. For those who don't know, I'm Stephen Conway. I'm the leader of the Council and the Executive Member for Housing, Partnerships and the Local Plan, and I'm going to be chairing this meeting. Before we start, a few of the normal housekeeping points. There are no fire drills planned this evening, and if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building via the nearest exit and gather at muster point 2, which is located in the car park at the rear of the building. Please ensure that any mobile devices or mobile phones are switched off. And if you're participating via Teams, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphones. And please note that the meeting is being webcast live. And I just want to introduce you to the officers in the room with us. They're on the outer edge, only literally, certainly not metaphorically. And I'll start over there. We've got Matt Pope, who is the Executive Director for Adults, Children's and Public Health. And next to Matt is George Pramarico, who's the Director of Place and Growth. And next to George is Sally Watkin, who I just discovered has a title that's called Director of Corporate Community and Change. And we've moved to this table. That's Priya Patel, Head of Democratic Services. Then Susan Parsonage, the Chief Executive. Andrew Moulton, the Assistant Director of Governance and the Council's Monitoring Officer. And finally, the Chief Finance Officer and Deputy Chief Executive, Graham Ebers. So that's the council officers who are present this evening. I'm now going to ask the councillors present to say who they are and what their executive responsibilities are, starting with you, David.
I'm David Kerr, Executive Member for Adult Services, Health and Wellbeing.
Good evening, I'm Rachel Bishop-Firth. I'm Executive Member for Resident Services, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty.
Good evening, I'm Imogen Shepherd-Bay. I am the Executive Member for Finance and Governance.
Good evening, everybody. I'm feeling very short because my chair won't go up. I'm Prue Bray. I'm the Lead Member for Children's Services and the Deputy Leader of the Council.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Martin Order. I'm the Executive Member for Active Transport, Travel and Highways.
Thank you, Martin. I should have said when I was introducing the officers that online I can see Emma Cockrell, who's the Director of Children's Services, and I think I can see Rebecca Bird, who's from our comms team. I think they're both there. Thank you. Right, if we can move on to apologies for absence. I'm aware that Mark Ashwell cannot be here this evening. I think it's unlikely Jordan Montgomery will join us until later, and too late, I think, for this executive meeting, but I'm hoping he'll be with us at the council meeting. So, noting those, can we approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of January? Is everybody happy that I sign those minutes as a true record? Yes? Martin, are you happy to? Good. Okay, thank you. I'll just do that now and hand these back to Priya. And while I'm doing it, are there any declarations of interest in any of the items on the agenda? There are none that I can see, so we'll move on, if not seamlessly, at least rapidly, to a very brief statement from me. There's been much concern expressed by parents and pupils at Embrook School that the council is not going to honour its commitment to deliver a new sixth form block. I'm therefore taking this opportunity to reassure parents, pupils and others that the council will be adhering to the agreement it reached with the trust in May 2024 to fund a new sixth form block. I should add that that I say all this as someone who believes strongly in providing opportunities for everyone, regardless of who they are, to achieve their true potential. I'm committed to supporting local education. We all win when educational opportunities are maximised. Not only benefits the individual, by increasing their chances of leading a happy and fulfilled life. It also helps society by increasing the skills available. Thank you. So we're going to move now on to public questions, and the first question is from Michael Hurd. I don't know whether Michael's online. He doesn't seem to be. In view of the fact that Michael isn't here, I will send him a written reply to his question. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next public question, and that's from a familiar face, Andy Croy. Welcome back, Andy. It's good to see you, as always.
Thank you, Stephen.
Would you like to ask the question that you've submitted?
Thank you, Stephen. Nice to see you too, and yes, I will. I'll abbreviate it slightly to omit some of the detail. My question is for Martin. The Corporate and Community Overview and Scrutiny meeting on the 12th of November 2024 included an appendix, Appendix B. One of the items in this appendix, PG.R3, titled Introducing Changes for Existing Free Car Parks, contained text which said 5 more are council-owned car parks that serve some of the borough's major public open spaces and playing pitches. Could the executive member please name these 5 major public open spaces and playing pitches currently served by free Wokingham Borough Council-owned car parks?
Right. So, thanks, Andy, for your question.
You need to put your microphone on.
Oh, sorry. I should know that. It's part of my job before. Thank you, Andy, for your question. The 5 free council-owned car parks that serve some of the borough's major public open spaces and playing pitches are Cantley Park, Ashenbury Park, Laurel Park, Chalfont Park and Chestnut Park. It's worth mentioning that the council decided not to introduce any parking charges at any of these sites in this year's budget, despite the major pressure on the budget, as you can imagine. It's worth mentioning that the council has listened to concerns over the proposed car parking charges at Cantley Park in particular, and will not be introducing them in next week's budget.
Well, tonight,
In fact, tonight, sorry, it was next week when it was written. So Wokingham Borough Council will set its budget having sorry, I couldn't read your writing there, Stephen. This evening, sorry. Against a very difficult financial backdrop, as you know, it's not easy. The Council's lowest settlement funding assessment, the annual government grant to pay for services per person of any unitary authority in the country, and this facing a real terms reduction of £1 million in government support next year. The financial situation has been made worse by the inflation of recent years, increasing residents' needs and the changes in the national insurance caused by the national insurance increase, which I think we're all aware of. The income generated through hiring out the facilities at Cantley Park does not currently cover the running costs and the investments required at the park, and so the council needs to find a way to ensure it stays financially viable in the future. It's been proposed to introduce car parking charges at the park to make up it had been proposed to introduce the car parking charges at the park to make up the shortfall. But instead, we will now talk to those who use the park so we can jointly come up with the best solution to protect its future. And that's the aim, is really protecting Cantley Park so it is available for the future for everybody. It would be lovely to magic the money from somewhere, but the reality is we have to find it somehow, and it's doing it in a way that everybody considers fair and justifiable.
Andy, I feel it myself confident in saying that you'll have a supplementary.
Where to even start, Stephen? Where to start? Just the one, that's the problem. So I would appreciate it if you could repeat those parts again more slowly so I can jot them down when you answer. So that's not a question, that's
Andy, would you like me to give you a copy of it? Because it's written,
okay,
it was written down. It'd be much easier for everybody and for you, I think.
I'll take that. So, I guess my other comment before I come into my question is of course, the decision to charge for car parking is not a decision which sits within the budget. It's a decision for the executive. So it is theoretically, I guess, possible for the executive to decide later on that they will introduce car parking charges. So with that in mind, with that in mind, and also in mind that since this £1 million figure was first floated, the government has actually given the council an extra £1.2 million. With that in mind, would you like to take this opportunity to guarantee that there will be no imposition of car parking charges at any of the car parks that you have mentioned, with the exception of Cantley, which we know is subject to a separate thing? So for the other 4, would you guarantee that there will be no imposition of car parking charges?
Andy, I'm not expert in the council's finances, so I'm going to hand over to Stephen to respond to that.
Well, first of all, Andy, as Martin explained, we are engaged in a process of consulting and working with the users of all of these facilities to work out what the best way of ensuring their long-term financial viability is. We're not including car parking charges in this year's budget, as you'll see later on. Your point about the 1.2 million, it is very important, I think, that we recognise that was given specifically to cover off the increased costs to the council of the increase in employers' national insurance contributions. That increased cost is 1.5 million. So the 1.2 million the government is giving us actually leaves us £300,000 short. And it's also important to note that the government actually reduced our core revenue support by £1 million. So we are £1 million and £300,000 down, £1.3 million down, and that's not including the potential for the passing on to us of costs for national insurance and increases in minimum wage from our contracted social care providers. So I understand that the government has given us some extra money to cover off this increase in national insurance. Unfortunately, it's not enough in our case to cover that off, but they have reduced our core revenue support. I know you're reluctant to accept that, but they have.
What I'm hoping for was clarity on the 4 car parks which aren't Cantley.
Well, that consultation is taking place in all of the places that were proposed initially to have car parking charges. We're not pursuing car parking charges in any. We're engaging with the users in each case, each of those 4 car parks, to determine what the best way of ensuring their long-term financial viability is. I don't think we can allow you multiple supplementaries, but I'm very happy to have a conversation with you outside this meeting if that helps. Okay, thanks, Andy. Thank you. Sorry, we now move on to the final question, which is directed at Martin also. It's Charles Hockin, but Charles likewise doesn't appear to be here, so I think we will have to provide Charles with a written reply. Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of public questions. The next item on our agenda is councillor questions, there is no councillor question that's been submitted, I understand. Thank you, Priya. So we're going to move on to the matters for consideration in this meeting. And we're going to start with, we're going to have 4 reports, all led by Imogen, because they're all in the area of finance. And they relate to material that the council will be considering and voting on later this evening. So we're going to start with the first one, item 75, the Housing Revenue Account Budget. And if you could just say a few words of introduction on this, Imogen.
I mean, obviously, all of these reports will be talked about as a group later this evening. So the Housing Revenue Account must be self-funding, which essentially means that the money raised from rents can only be used to manage and maintain our social housing. I think the key point of note in this report is that the rents will only increase by 2.7% from the 7th of April, which is broadly in line with what inflation has been and below the current level that was announced yesterday. Looking at the details in these reports, this should be enough funds to meet the needs of our tenants. And that's all I'm going to say on that one.
Thank you very much, Imogen. I would completely endorse what you've said about the structure of the HRA. And obviously, it's very important that we maintain its long-term viability, because on it depends the accommodation of our tenants. So all those in favour of the recommendation on page 21, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. So if we can move on to the next of your suite of reports, Imogen, it's item
Sure.
76, Capital Programme and Strategy 2025-28.
Capital Programme Budget 25-27. This is the Council's draft plan for development and use of the capital funds for the years 2025 to 2028. It provides a high-level overview of approximately 483 million of our funds, how it's to be spent, and it includes carry forwards from previous years. The key area of spends are on housing, children's services and schools, road and transport, environment and adult social care. And we can see this list on page 34. The details of where the spends are in the details of these reports, and these are things that we should be proud of as a council. But to summarise, in the area of children's services, you can see there's funding for care leavers accommodation, sixth form expansion, funding for extra school places and resources for children with special educational needs. In housing, we are building more affordable housing and investing in the council's housing stock. We are improving local cycling and walking infrastructure, public rights of way, installing EV charging points and improving bus stops and signage. We are improving drainage, bridges and embankments for our roads and infrastructure. We are also improving adult day services and supported accommodation. Much of this is coming from developer contributions, but the majority will be borrowed and some will be from grants. The Treasury Management Report will detail some of this later on, but the borrowing is often used to invest in investor-save projects where the council will save money in the long term by us borrowing the money now. In the current capital programme, there has been a shortfall in funding of there is a shortfall in funding of 7 million across years 2 and 3. We are expecting to reprofile some of the expenditure, and some will be funded by further community infrastructure levy funding from developers. We will have to continue to review our situation over the next year, and that should be it.
Thank you very much, Imogen, and thank you for actually listing some of the important things in the capital strategy. That's really encouraging, and I think that will become apparent to people in the years ahead. Can we now, if there are no questions in relation to that report, if we could go to the recommendations on page 33. There are 5 of them. I think we'll take them on block. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's everyone. And if we now move on to the third of your 4 finance reports, Imogen, the Treasury Management Strategy, item 77 on page 73 of everyone's agenda.
Okay, yes. This report sets out how to show how we are managing the council's finances in terms of treasury management. This included borrowing, investments and cash flows. The report also shows that we are doing this in line with the professional good conduct practices and the CITFA code. The council needs to use what money it has to raise cash through the year to meet its day-to-day operations. With good planning, the other cash that the council has can be invested in the short term into low-risk areas. In addition, we also need to use our money to meet the council's capital plans, and that may include borrowing to meet that need. While this function is much talked about, or not much talked about, is actually one of the vital things we need to do to ensure the council can carry out its work. If we did not have the money to operate from day to day, the council would cease to operate and would be ineffective. You can see on page 76, our capital programme will need 91.7 million for the year 25-26. This will come from a mixture of grants, developer contributions and borrowing. The capital programme currently has a shortfall of 7 million, as I said earlier, over the next 3 years, which will need to be covered by reprofiling, additional developer contributions and bidding for grants. As I've already said, we need to monitor this going forward. There is a significant concern about the dedicated schools grant. If the government does not come up with a plan to tackle this problem, at the moment, the loan to cover the extra borrowing, which is mainly supporting children with special educational needs, is not appearing in council budgets. But this situation is due to end next year. It will cause significant financial problems for councils all around the country, not just us, if no action is taken. While this money is not showing in the budget, its interest payments for the loans come from revenue, and at the moment that is almost 2 million a year. In Appendix B, you can see a list of the low-interest loans the council has taken from the Public Works Loan Board, and with one from a local authority and others from Barclays and a retirement scheme. As long as these are monitored closely, they should be of benefit to our residents. Appendix C is the annual investment strategy, and Appendix D is our minimum revenue provision policy, which ensures that we are paying off our loans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imogen. I was particularly pleased to see you mentioning the Dedicated Schools Grant and the challenges that poses to not just this council but all councils. Okay, are there any points anyone wishes to raise? Thank you. So I'm going to move on now to ask you... Oh. Yeah, I'm just about to. I was just going to move on to the recommendation on page 73.
Sorry, I thought you were going to move on.
No, I'm not moving on that quickly. Where we have one recommendation, but it's broken down into several parts. So we're asked to approve the Treasury Management Strategy as set out in Appendix A and the additional appendices, the prudential indicators, the annual investment strategy and the minimum revenue provision policy. So those all in favour, please show. That's excellent. That's everyone. Again, thank you. Now we move on to the last of your reports, Imogen, the medium-term financial plan 2025-28, including the revenue budget submission for this coming financial year. And that's on page 125 of your agenda.
Thank you, Stephen. This report is going to be talked about extensively at our budget meeting later on this evening. I would like to point out this is the result of a lot of work that we must thank our officers for. The fact that we could produce a balanced budget in this climate where so many councils are in trouble is due to their credit. It is also important to say that we are at the point where we are having to look at difficult and unpopular decisions. Sometimes we'll have to consider those impacts and changes and the direction, and change the direction, sorry. But we must be clear that beyond the year 2025 to 26, there are significant revenue and capital funding gaps that cannot be ignored. The reduction in our government-funded grants have been having a major impact on our budgets from far back as 2010 to 2011. And the problem with meeting the rising demands on our adult social care and tackling children with special educational needs is not going away. Wokingham is treated unfairly in its calculation because it's calculated on the levels of deprivation, not what each council actually needs to provide those services to its residents. Next week, I will respond to the government's consultation on the local government funding, and we will highlight on the shortfall in this formula. While there is a lot of information in these reports, perhaps the most important thing is that the Chief Financial Officer's statutory report, where the Chief Financial Officer, Graham Ebers, states, him over there, states that he considers the proposals of for 2025 to 26 to be sound, responsible and affordable. Therefore, we are in a good position for the forthcoming year.
Thank you very much, Imogen. I'd like to endorse your comments on the excellent work done by our officers, not just at Director and Chief Finance Officer level, but throughout the organisation. They've all contributed to ensuring we've been able to set this balanced budget. And I also endorse your comments about the need for a fairer funding formula that recognises the true costs for all councils, irrespective of levels of deprivation, in delivering adult and children's social care. That's vitally important that the government tries to look afresh at the funding formula. Prue, you clearly want to say something also.
I do, thank you. Because I only get 3 minutes later on to talk about children's services. And I wanted to say something about, or expand on what Imogen started to talk about under the Treasury Management, which is the Dedicated Schools Grant. Because it has some very large numbers, which have a significant negative impact on the council, but we can do little about it. So it's not part of the main council budget, but it is mentioned in the medium-term financial plan. It's the grant from the government that goes to pay for education, and it comes in 4 blocks, one for schools, one for early years, one for administration, and one for something called high needs, which is for special educational needs provision. And putting it as simply as possible, the money the government provides to pay for special educational needs is nowhere near enough. This is a national problem, has been the case for a long time. The new government has said they're going to reform special educational needs funding, but also that they don't expect to come up with proposals for about a year. They are going to probably do a white paper fairly soon, but we won't see the fruits of anything for quite a while. In the meantime, the high needs block in Wokingham, like just about everywhere else, is running at a deficit. And that deficit this year is just under 20 million. And cumulatively, it's around 38 million. It has been building up steadily since 2017. It is hard to analyse exactly how much of it is due to the Conservative government's poor funding. and how much is due to the previous Conservative administration here at the Council failing to take the right action. We expect the gap between the funding and the cost to increase further in future years, although there are signs in recent months that the huge programme of transformation and improvement work that we're now doing locally is slowing the rate of increase down a little. Now, despite the fact we're not expected to be responsible for the entire amount as it sits off our books, it has a significant impact on us as a council because we have to service the debt, which will cost us almost £2 million this year. And that's a figure which will keep going up and up each year as the deficit increases. But that's not the worst that could happen. We know that this will continue to sit off our books for at least another year, but what will happen beyond that is not clear. If we become liable for the whole amount, it wouldn't be very many years before it totalled more than all our council reserves. And I prefer not to think about what would happen then. The only reason for optimism is that it will be the same for nearly every county council and unitary authority in the land. So I believe we can expect the government to avoid it happening if they possibly can. So the financial situation is clearly important, but what's really tragic about this is that special educational needs funding is not delivering for children. It's in a mess. It's a mess created by the previous Conservative government who, as shown by a recent National Audit Office report, had no idea what provision was needed and no coherent plan to provide it. The current government have inherited this mess, and because of the scale of it, councils are reliant on them to sort it out. We are, of course, doing everything we can, but it's such a big issue, it's beyond our ability to fix it locally. So we are using our influence and the influence of our local MPs to make the case to government for sensible reforms, and we will continue to do that. So it's sitting there. It's not something we can deal with by ourselves. It is having an impact on us in having to deal with the cost of it on our revenue account, and we don't know what's going to happen. But this year we're still okay.
Yeah, thank you, Prue. Those important points. It's also important, I think, to say that there are some extremely good things in our revenue budget. Yes. Despite the financial challenges that we've faced, we have actually been able to do some bold things that will improve the quality of life for many of our residents. So I'm very proud of the budget, as well as grateful for the work that's been put into it by officers and executive members. So thank you, Imogen, for your role as well in particular. So with all that said, can we move to the recommendation, which is on page 125? There are three recommendations. If I could, well, I'm not going to read them all out, but they all relate to this item, and they effectively are approvals that we need to give. Those in favour, please show. Thank you, everyone. That's carried. And if we move now through to item 79, school admission arrangements for 2026 to 27, on page 335 of your agenda. That tells you how much is in there to do with finance.
Yes, shall I start?
Yes, please.
So I think probably this is, school admissions is a bit technical, so it's probably as well for me to explain it to everybody so they understand it. So the first thing to make sure everybody understands is that these admissions arrangements apply to maintained schools. Academy trusts are their own admissions authorities, although they are required to be part of the local authority's coordinated admissions arrangements. And that's one of the reasons why this only talks about primary school admissions, because all our secondary schools are academies. All right. The second thing is that the admission arrangements have to be agreed 18 months in advance. So this report is about admissions for September 2026 and does not have any impact on the coming September. There are no proposals to change the oversubscription criteria. The significant change that is taking place is to reduce the published admissions number, which is normally called the PAN, for 8 primary schools. And this is the number that says how many children should be admitted into reception classes. and you can see the table of proposed changes on page 338. This is not a change being arbitrarily imposed on schools by the council. The schools support it. What has happened is that we have finally reached the point where we are coming in line with much of the rest of the country, in that the birth rate has been falling, and this has left us with too many primary school places. In Wokingham, this has been balanced until now by extra children resulting from migration into the borough and new building. But now it has reached the point where we have to take action. The reason we have to reduce the admission numbers is that the vast majority of primary school funding is per pupil. Schools simply cannot afford to carry a lot of spare capacity. If your school staffing has to be set up to educate 45 children, but you only actually get 35, you don't have sufficient income to cover your staffing costs. And the way to address this is to try to match as closely as possible the number of children you need to plan for with the number of children you are going to get. And that's what these PAN reductions aim to do. Over the past few years, some of our primary schools have tried individually to get their admission number reduced by applying to the Office of the School's Adjudicator, who are responsible for authorising or rejecting requests for a reduction in admissions number. But even with the support of the council, it has not always been possible to get authorisation, as demonstrating there is an overall sufficiency of places can be difficult when a single school applies. So we've decided to address the issue as an education system through making the change as part of the admission arrangements. Even with these reductions, we will still have ample school places. If something changes and it looks like we need more in the future, it is relatively simple to reverse the reductions. Now, there are a couple of things to add. The first is the situation is not the same everywhere in the borough. And in particular, in the Shinfield area, there is still pressure on primary school places, so we're not proposing any reductions in places there. And the other is that quite a number of our primary schools are academies. They are experiencing similar problems, and alongside the proposals contained within the current report, our local multi-academy trusts have consulted on PAN reductions totalling 114 places annually at 5 schools across the borough for the same academic year. So we're moving together as an education system. All partners in the local school system are conscious that further PAN reductions will likely be required. And we are just starting a piece of work with other education system leaders to see how we can, between us, ensure that we reduce excess places to reduce pressure on school finances, while balancing that with the need for primary schools to be local. And I hope that explains the report, and I can take any questions if anybody has any.
I think that was a very comprehensive explanation, which I think will offer some reassurance to a lot of people, assuming there's anybody out there actually listening. I hope there is, because that was very helpful. Thank you, Prue. I don't see anybody bursting to ask a question, so I'm assuming we can go to a vote on the recommendations on page 335 and just over onto the top of page 336. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's carried unanimously. And we move now on to page 477, the Outdoor Sports Facilities Assessment Report and Action Plan, Playing Pitches Strategy. Now, ordinarily, this report would have been presented to you by Mark Ashwell, but Mark, as you know, is unable to be with us this evening. So I will be presenting the report on his behalf. And I think I don't need to say very much, but it's important, I think, to emphasise that playing pitch facilities in the borough currently enable more than 10,000 residents regularly to enjoy playing sports. An active lifestyle is, of course, vital for both physical and mental well-being and can reduce the risk of early death by 30%. It's a really quite staggering figure. We recognise the importance of an active lifestyle, and this strategy has identified a need for 8 additional artificial grass pitches across the borough. Most of these will be delivered in development-funded projects, probably at Grays Farm, Hogwood Farm and Hall Farm. And this will be in conjunction with unlocking match funding from our national sports and national sport via the Football Association. The established communities of Woodley and Earley, where there is a considerable need, will secure their facilities when suitable sites have been identified. I think that's all that needs to be said on this. Are there any questions anyone wishes to ask? A lot of work has gone into this, and I'd like to thank Mark for all of that. And if we could go to the recommendations, there are 3 of them on page 477. Okay, those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. And then we move on to the final item on our agenda, and that's item 81 on page 855 of your absolutely gigantuan agenda. If you're having to turn the pages, there's rather a lot to turn to get to page 855. And the item here is the remaining grant allocation for delivery of Afghan and Ukrainian refugee schemes. And I want to really just say a few words as in my role as executive member for housing. I see the report has demoted me. I'm now back down to being the deputy leader of the council, but I won't hold that against anyone. I don't think it's a sign of an incipient plot. I think that was my title when this report was first considered in March 2023. That's all that's happened. And in March 2023, this executive agreed that we would use a government grant, which we then had to top up, to provide homes for 17 Ukrainian and Afghan refugee families. This was a significant investment, but it was an investment that will have long-term benefits. It will not only, of course, immediately provide homes for Ukrainian and Afghan refugees, which was immensely important, but it will, in the long term, increase the amount of housing for general use on the housing revenue account, because these properties, once the Ukrainian and Afghan occupants decide they wish to move on, become available for general use. And that will add to the housing revenue account's properties. And going back to the report we looked at earlier on the housing revenue account, its long-term sustainability will be enhanced if we can increase its size. That brings in more rental income, and if it includes newer properties, they will have less liability for repairs and maintenance. Now, we have some money left over from the money that was allocated for the 17 properties, and we are proposing to use the remainder to acquire at least one more property to add to this usage. And it, again, as I just stressed, will subsequently be available for general use in the HRA. So that's, I think, all I need to say by way of explanation of this piece. Is everybody in support of this? I hope they are. Please show. Thank you. That's excellent. And that, I'm rather pleased to say, brings us to the end of our executive meeting this evening, because we have to go very shortly into another meeting in the council. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for attending, and I will see you all shortly.